Hey guys, welcome back to Track the Harmonic. I'm your host, Lord MC. Hope you guys are having an amazing start to your weekend. Today, I wanted to take a moment to share my thoughts on where I see the market potentially going, especially after this week's very interesting close. I like to consider myself a technical analysis enthusiast, so I'm going to be sharing my thoughts. And right now, I am seeing some indicators that suggest the market wants to push forward. The charts do show a potential, and I repeat, this is a potential bullish trend forming, and certain sectors are showing strong momentum. However, this is where the dilemma I have. On the other hand, you have the economic outlook, which is saying otherwise. We still have inflation concerns, we still have the whole banking situation, as well as the rising interest rates that are maybe kind of potentially weighing down on the market, right? So next week is going to be very important as the Fed will release what those interest rates will be. So we'll find out on Tuesday whether the market's going to continue pushing forward or going to come down here. But I do believe there's an explosive move that will happen in the weeks to come, if not next week. So I will be diving into the technical analysis side of it because this is a technical analysis channel. I'll be taking a closer look at the charts and sharing my technical analysis on where I think the market may be headed. But before I get into that, I want to preface by saying I am not a financial advisor. None of the things I say in my videos or anywhere else is ever financial advice. So question everything, do your own research, and come out with your own conclusions. So having said that, let's jump right into it. So I'll be looking at the indices and the blue chips, the major ones. This is not going to go into too much detail because I do believe the indices is something people should be looking at right now, and especially the blue chips, the big boys, which are driving the market up or holding the market up into these levels. So we're going to be looking at here at the SPY. So the SPY did close on the week. This is the weekly chart. The high was 396.47, the low for the week being 380.65, before closing the week at 389.99. Let's just call it 390. So the market makers or the market in general left us on a cliffhanger, that 390 level. So this level here is where SPY is having a hard time getting above, especially on Friday. It's hovering around that area. So what are we looking at here harmonically on the SPY for the weekly chart? As you can tell here, when the pattern completed here for this deep crab, this bullish deep crab, at the completion of point D, you had a type 1 reaction. It looks like you were going to come down for a potential type 2, but you kind of held above this area here, and you continued to go to target 1 here at 404, which you came back down, and now this is the hard part of figuring out whether this is going to come back for that type 2 return, potentially down to XA at 357 or hop at 324, or continue and finish up to target 2 at 433. So if we're looking at this from a technical analysis side, we could look at the volume indicating where this may be headed to potentially, right? So the previous weekly close, the volume surpassed the previous close. So this could be a strong indication that the sellers maybe have exhausted themselves here, because they did try to bring it down here, but this close kind of signaling some strength here. You finish within the body of the previous close, so we will see if this is a potential reversal. Now, since I do harmonic analysis, I'm going to bring up here my levels and as well as what the HSI and the AMP RSI is telling us. So for the weekly, you have the HSI still coming down here. Maybe we'll find out at the start of next week whether this actually is coming back up or continuing to push down. If this signaling that it's potentially coming back up, maybe it wants to test that midline, in which case that midline would be around 404, and I do believe if it crosses that midline, you can come back to test the over butt zones, which would bring up SPY here to that target to around 433. So the AMP RSI is telling us that it looks like it wants to cross up here to that midline. Still too early to tell, but from a volume analysis side of things, the volume surpassed previous bar, right, for last week's with volume. So this push up here, strong push up to keep the price here at these levels at 390 when you fell almost down to below 380. So it is kind of I consider this bullish. I will still need to see what this week is gonna say about this week's close, but we will have to wait and see to see if there's more continuation or downside. For the If the market decides to come down here the next weeks to come, you are approaching the 200 weekly here. So the 200 weekly is at 372.76 and a couple cents from the 200 SMA, which is at 372.25. So not that much of a difference. Should you lose the 200 weekly, that is bearish for the market, and you potentially come down here to test XA at 357.04, which would be around the October lows. And if you finish that and close below, you can see hop at 324. It's too early to tell. I will reiterate that this is on the weekly chart, so this may take some time to play out. But we are in a very key critical level here. So I do believe next week when the Fed releases those interest rates to see if they're going to either keep it at 25 basis points or they're going to mention any pause, I do think the market will act bullish and trend upwards. So if they don't say anything bearish, then the market, in my opinion, you could see SPY here at that 433 level. But if there's bearish news with the Fed, maybe you come down here, potentially 357, and then hop. One of my theories is that you can come back next week, maybe test the 200 weekly, which should scare a lot of people out at 372, thinking we could come back down here below and test these October lows. Because if we go back here all the way, I kind of want to quickly just share the few times the SPY on the weekly fell below the 200. So obviously we had that in right here, the 200 and the 200 SMA and 200 weekly here. This was during 2002, right? And then right here, obviously in 2008, where we fell below. And then from then on, we kind of came below in 2011, but we didn't drop this the way we dropped here back in 2008, which is almost 50%. And over during this time, I do think it was, give or take, maybe 30%, somewhere around there. So after these times where we fell below, significantly below the 200 weekly EMA, the couple times we came down here to test it, we come down and the market decided to just continue pushing on upwards. Back in 2016, you found support off the 200 weekly, and then in December 2018, the same thing. You found support at 200 weekly, and obviously the time we did come below the 200 SMA and the 200 EMA was during COVID, and you fell down 18%, but you didn't significantly drop like you did back in 2008 and 2002. And then after you found support, or you broke back above the 200 weekly, the market decided to continue on pushing forward. So as of recent, we have tested the 200 weekly here in January and June 22nd, right? June 13 of last year. So we found support and we continued pushing upwards. And then during this time where we actually did fall below the 200 weekly, we went to 348 being the low of October, right? So we did break down from it and we continued pushing. So now we're set up in the same situation as we have been before the past two times. But this time, who knows if we're going to get some movement like this or a drastic move down. So if we were to take an average of 18% here from, this is just assuming here that you fall below 18% like you did here in COVID, you fell 18%, call it 19%. If we fall below here, the 200, we would come back down to around 308, maybe anywhere between hop 320 to 310. If it was a similar type move, doesn't have to be a similar type move. Maybe you just come down here, maybe you create a lower low, and then you come back up and the market decides to push forward after that. Or you have a situation where you bounce because you have bounced off the 200. You didn't actually close. Did you close below? You closed below, and then you found support, you came back up, and you continue pushing. So this time, if we do come back down here, we can find support around 372 and then decide to push on forward. Doesn't mean we have to, but if that's the case, it's going to be a significant move, whether you come and bounce off of it or you come below it. I do think if you come below it, you will create lower lows. So it's going to be an interesting week, and I do think Tuesday will decide. SPY on the weekly chart doesn't really show a lot of signs like it wants to continue pushing, but I think people are just overlooking other indices, and one of the indices that people should be looking where it clearly shows bullish sentiment is the triple Qs. So we're going to jump over here to the triple Qs. So the triple Qs on the weekly closed almost 6% up for the week. The low was 285.19, the high being 309.15, where it finally closed at 305.36. If you look at the NASDAQ, the volume that support this push up was supported because you surpassed last week's volume. Not only did you surpass last week's volume, but you engulfed the previous close, the previous weekly close. That in and itself is very bullish for the market. This could signify a lot of strength and continuing to push to the upside. Now, depending on who you ask, it's all subjective. Some people consider an engulfing candle to engulf just the body. Some people say you have to engulf the wicks and the body, so the complete candle. And in this situation, you have the NASDAQ completely engulf the previous close, wicks and body. So this is very bullish, and you have that supporting it with the volume increase. Now, we don't have a harmonic here on the weekly, but we do have it on the 3-day, I believe. Yep, so the 3-day here, you have the HSI signaling that it wants to potentially come up here to that midline. If you cut to that midline, you potentially test target 1 here at 327.72, where the 200 SMA is at, right? So this 3-day close will play out in itself. On Wednesday, we'll have a new candle forming, so this still has a little bit more. You still have Monday and Tuesday to see if the sell side of it, if this is continuing to push down here and the volume doesn't pick up halfway or even 3/4, that will signal to me that the bears are getting tired, getting exhausted, and maybe you do continue pushing. But I'm going to be looking at the weekly chart of things here. So from a technical analysis side here of perspective of the triple Qs, which should be a leading indicator right now, because a leading stock to signify maybe the market's continuing pushing is the NASDAQ. The NASDAQ is closed on a very strong week, engulfing the previous candle, so this could potentially keep going on up. You are above all major EMAs here that I follow, which is a 9, 13, 21, and 50, and you're above the 200 weekly and 200 SMA. So this week was very bullish for the NASDAQ. So jumping over to the Dow Jones. So if we track the Dow Jones, like I said, the Dow Jones, maybe things are actually, I think the tech sector right now is actually leading the race. This is why maybe the Dow Jones here finished the week at 318.50. The low was 314.97, and the high being 323. So from a volume analysis, you did close higher than the previous week. The only difference is that the candle doesn't look as bullish. It's kind of hard to tell whether this is going to be continuation to the upside, but the volume the buy side did surpass last week's close. If we jump over here to see a harmonic, I do think there's one on the 3-day. Potentially here, you maybe come down to test 312 before you continue pushing up, but let me jump over real quick to the daily. On the daily, you did generate a new harmonic pattern, which is a shark pattern here, and you kind of closed on the daily. Now you're looking at this push down on decrease in volume compared to the previous 2 days. So this looks like I said, maybe the bears are getting exhausted a little bit. So the HSI did cross to the upside here, and maybe it wants to come back up to 320 before continuation to target 1 at 332 and then 344. Too early to tell, but the volume did decrease on Friday to the sell side. You do have on the daily, you do have, it looks kind of bearish. You're below the 200 SMA here, and you have a potential death cross happening on the EMAs. But from, like I said, from the weeklies, I think something that I'm going to be looking at is on the weekly, it was a bit bullish. So now I'm going to be going over here to the blue chips, and one of them being here Apple, which is why I'm having this dilemma here, where on the weekly chart all these blue chips are showing good strength and in the weekly close. If we look at the Apple here on the weekly, in this case, I guess it's subjective. This, if you were considering an engulfing candle to just enclose the body, it did that, right? And it was with increased volume. It surpassed last week's volume with strength. And on Apple, you have this type 1 reaction here up to target 1 at 146.62, and you closed above it for, now you have been closing above this for 7 weeks now, above 146. So if Apple decides, and if the market decides to continue pushing forward, you can see Apple to target 2 harmonically at 160.49. After that, who knows where Apple go. It wouldn't be crazy to think that it could test even all-time highs again if we do have a bounce off of the weekly 200 EMA off of SPY. If it continues to push forward, I do think it would be crazy to say that Apple could test potentially its all-time highs again. I know it's crazy to say that, especially with where we are in the economic perspective side of things, but it is what it is. So, like, again, Apple looks very bullish after this week's close, and I have nothing to say else than the market deciding to rip, which is crazy to me to say that right now, but we will see if that's happened with the federal rate decision coming into next week. I'm jumping over to another one here, Microsoft. Look at Microsoft close. If this doesn't tell you that this is a bullish candle, I don't know what else to tell you. But it's crazy. Last week's volume, you had 117 volume come in, and then this week you had 237. You destroyed last week's volume. You stomped on it and some. You engulfed it like you've never seen. You engulfed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever you want to call it. You engulfed so much of the previous weekly candle bars. It's crazy. Off of this bullish bat pattern, you had a beautiful type 1 reaction, and you now close with strength on this weekly close above target 1, 265.47. So Microsoft had a 12% move for this week. It went as high as 283. The low it went to was 245 before closing the week at 279.43. This, to me, is signaling strength and continuation, to be honest. But like I said, it all comes down to what the Fed is going to say on Tuesday. If there's a mention of a pause, I do think the market is going to rip, in my opinion. So what's the next level of resistance for Microsoft? Should it continue push, the market continue pushing? That is 297.63, target 2. Maybe call it 300. It wouldn't be crazy to see even push higher than 300. You have the HSI bounce off the midline, right? You still have so much room for any of the critical zones here for the AMP RSI, and as well as the regular RSI. So this is Microsoft, in my opinion, out of the blue chips now, is leading the way. So very bullish to see on Microsoft. I'm going to go over to Amazon now. So Amazon on the weekly does have this bullish bat pattern. It went as high as 9% for the week, the high being $100, almost $101. It went as high as $199, the low being $88.12 before closing at $98.95. You also had another engulfing candle on the weekly, surpass and showing confirmation with higher volume than the previous weekly volume bar. The HSI is signaling that it maybe, we'll find out if this is going to cross next week, but it's signaling potential to continue pushing on up here to at least 112, and then target 1 at 122.39. Like I said before, depending on what the Fed has to say, it wouldn't be crazy to think that all these blue chips are going to maybe potentially go to do a type 1 reaction on the weekly up to target 2. If I go back to, like I said, Microsoft has been leading the way, and it's already passed its target 1 on the weekly, and its next level it wants to potentially try and hit is that target 2. So if Microsoft is leading the way and every other chip, blue chip, is following, Apple is almost there as well to target 2. It would not be too crazy to think that Amazon can go up to that target 2 as well at 147.69, depending on what the Fed is going to say next week. But a little bit crazy to say that, but we will see if this at least wants to attempt target 1 at 122.39. So that's Amazon. Jumping over to Tesla here. So Tesla, there's still a lot of volatility going on with Tesla. It's been having a hard time, but staying above 171.46. It did finish the week at 3.86%, the high being at 186, low being 163 before closing the weekly at 180.13. So you did close above BC here. So like I've said, if Microsoft is leading the way, it wouldn't be too crazy to think that Tesla can go up to this target 2 at 295.05, call it 300. The next level of resistance, if you can get above the 21 EMA on Tesla at 188, call it 190, and especially 200, you could see target 1, 221. I've said that if you can go above 200, more precise 205, you can come here to 221. The HSI is signaling that it wants to come down to that midline, but like I said, we have to wait for Monday to see where that week or where the weekly closes to see if it maybe bounces off and then continues pushing on forward. Not as strong as Microsoft, Apple, and Amazon on the weekly close. You didn't engulf it. You kind of actually had decreasing volume. So who knows where Tesla can go to. If it doesn't find support here at 171.46 on the weekly, 127 would be the next target harmonically. There are other levels. I am looking at if you lose 164.67, you can come back down to fill that gap at 148, and then 127 would be the next target on the weekly. That obviously would take some time to play out. So jumping over to Google, kind of similar to Microsoft, went as high as 12% for the week, the high being 102, low being $89 before finishing on a strong close above $100 at exactly 101.62. Crazy week for Google on Friday, even crazier. One of the things that it's very bullish for Google, just looking at this weekly chart again, is that engulfing candle and that is supported by the volume that came in for that week, surpassing previous weekly closes, right? You did cross the HSI midline, so the next target harmonically off of this bullish crab pattern for Google is that target 1 at 109.39. And if it's deciding to do what Microsoft is doing, target 2 would be the next target at 125.49. You do have resistance here at the 50, EMA here at 103.74, but this is bullish here as volume is increasing here for Google. So we will find out if Google decides to continue pushing after the Fed comes out with this decision. If not, your next level of support you would have is 97, and then 95 before coming potentially back down to XA at 83. The next one I'm going to cover is Meta. So Meta is showing strong strength as well. It went as high as almost 9% for the week. The low was 174.82, the high being 205.76 before closing the day at 195.61. So it did hit $200, $205, and you also had an engulfing weekly close. So this is continuation. You've had about the most recent 3 weeks above XA here now. That's bullish to me. And the volume supported that push up. You surpassed a couple weeks closes, and you're potentially coming. It's crazy to say that you could see Meta here at 251 and possibly 300. So Meta looks very strong right now. We will see it is a little bit overbought here on the daily, I believe. I think, it actually came down already. The RSI cooled off a bit. So we will see if there's any continuation here. It's not crazy to think that Meta can go to 251 relatively quick. There is a gap here at 290. So there's still this harmonic that never played out. up to they did a type 1 reaction, so the daily has a target 1 at 251 and at target 2 at 302, which is similar to what the weekly is saying. So you will definitely keep an eye out if the market is going to continue pushing forward. But I do believe next week will decide it, in my opinion. But just looking at these blue chips, these big boys here, signaling this much strength on the weekly close with engulfing candles, that signifies strength. But that can all go away if the Fed says anything bearish next week. You can see that come back down. Maybe possible to say a Twin Tower situation, but too early to tell. We will have to take it day by day. I am just going to cover the last one to see where VIX close on the weekly here. So on the weekly, you closed 2.86% for the week. It went as high as $30, low being 22. You closed the day at 25.50. So there is still some fear right now in the market. You could potentially come back up here to 26.52 and then 34.84, and then hop if you're doing that type return here up to potentially hop at $40.79 on the weekly. I do believe that Monday the formula changes for the VIX, but yeah, if you see, in my opinion, if you come back down below 19, below 20, that will be very bullish for the market. Right now, above 25, above 20 in general, there's some fear. You definitely want the VIX to come down below 20, specifically 19, so you could consider potentially saying, hey, we're in a bull market. But right now, we aren't. So that's all I wanted to share with you guys. Definitely look at the NASDAQ, in my opinion, this week. It gives a better, what's the word I'm looking for? It gives a better view of where the market may be heading to, especially with all these blue chips closing as strong as it did. So please be careful next week. Keep an eye out on that. And that's all I have for you guys. I know this video is almost a half an hour long, but I do think you should really look at these blue chips, especially be looking at the weekly close. But other than that, I hope you guys have an amazing weekend. I will be streaming same time as always on Monday. And if you like this type of content, please consider me a like, commenting down below, and subscribing to the channel does help me out. Other than that, I hope you guys have a good rest of your weekend. Take care, everybody, and peace.